I had just spent the holidays with my family in Texas and was making the long drive back to my home in Louisiana. My name is Jake, and the trip was about 10 hours. On the way there, I had split the drive into 2 parts, but this time I decided to power through in one go. As I drove through the empty highway, the sky started to darken. The wind picked up, howling through the trees lining the road. The first raindrops hit my windshield, small at first, then quickly turning into a relentless downpour. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing louder with every mile I covered. The road, once dry and firm, was now slick with water, making it harder to control the car. I had seen storms before, but something about this one felt different, more violent, more dangerous. With 3 hours left to go, the storm had fully settled in. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the deserted stretch of road ahead. The rain hammered down so hard that my wipers could barely keep up, and the wind rocked my car from side to side. There wasn't a soul in sight, which was the only reason I kept pushing forward. I just wanted to get home and out of this nightmare. Then, about 30 minutes after passing the last small town, I spotted a car on the road ahead. Its taillights glowed red through the sheets of rain, barely visible in the storm. As I got closer, I realized it was stranded in the middle of the road, hazard lights blinking erratically. A man stood outside, hunched against the wind and rain. Stopping was the last thing I wanted to do. The rain was coming down in buckets, and the thought of stepping out into the storm was miserable. But the way his car was positioned, it blocked most of the narrow 2-lane road. I didn't have much of a choice. I pulled up behind him and parked. Before I could even process what I was doing, the man rushed toward my window, his drenched clothes clinging to his body. My car slid off the road and got stuck. "Can you help me push it out?" His voice was thick with an accent, and he spoke slowly, carefully, like he wasn't completely comfortable with English. I sighed. I just wanted to get home, but I couldn't exactly leave him stranded in the middle of a storm. "Yeah, sure," I said, forcing myself to be helpful. His car didn't look like it was buried too deep. Maybe a strong push would get it moving. I grabbed my jacket, zipped it up, and stepped out. The rain was ice cold, instantly drenching me. My boots sank slightly into the mud on the side of the road, and the wind nearly knocked me off balance. Walked to the back of his car and waited for him to grab his gloves. It was too dark and rainy to see inside, but as I stood there, I heard something. Muffled voices. I frowned. "Hey, were you talking to me?" I called over the roaring wind. He stiffened. For a split second, he looked unsure, like he had been caught doing something he shouldn't. Then he forced a smile. No, just talking to myself." Something felt off. His whole demeanor seemed different, uneasy. The air around us felt heavy, as if something was lurking just out of sight. I couldn't hear exactly what he had said earlier, but it didn't sound like someone mumbling to themselves. And if someone else was in the car, why was he out here alone asking for help? My instinct screamed at me to pay attention. Then I noticed him staring at me. His expression had changed. The smile had vanished, replaced by something unreadable. His eyes were hollow, dark, like he wasn't really there. Every hair on my body stood up. Just as I took a step back, the doors to his car suddenly flew open. 3 men jumped out, moving fast, their footsteps splashing against the soaked pavement as they rushed toward me. My stomach dropped. Without thinking, I turned and sprinted back to my car. My heart slammed against my ribs as I fumbled for the door handle. Thank God I had left the engine running. I threw myself inside, slammed the door shut, and shoved the car into drive. One of the men nearly reached my window. His hand stretched out toward the handle, but I didn't give him the chance. I hit the gas. The tires skidded on the wet road, but I managed to keep control. As I sped past their car, I nearly clipped one of them, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out of there. The road was barely visible through the heavy rain, and my hands shook on the wheel, but I kept driving, stealing frantic glances in my rearview mirror. Their car remained where it was, hazard lights still flashing. But I just knew, they hadn't been stuck at all. I didn't stop until I reached the next town. Soaking wet, still shaking, I stumbled into the police station and told them everything. They wrote down my statement, but no updates ever came. As far as I knew, those men had disappeared into the night, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. I have no idea what their plan was. I don't even want to think about it. All I know is if I had hesitated for even a second longer, I might not have made it home that night. Back in 2013, when I was 19, I was living alone in a small rental house just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. It wasn't anything fancy, just a little one-story place on the edge of town. It was my first time truly being on my own, and I was still getting used to the quiet, especially at night. It was a rainy Friday evening, and I had just gotten home from my shift at the local grocery store. I kicked off my shoes, changed into some sweatpants, and plopped onto my bed with a plate of leftovers. I was exhausted, ready to do nothing but binge-watch some TV and let the sound of the rain put me to sleep. Now, I've never been a fan of storms, not because of the rain or the thunder, but because of the way they make everything feel off. You ever notice that? Like the world slows down, and things don't quite feel real. It's just you, the storm, and whatever might be lurking in the darkness. The wind howled against the windows and the rain poured down in sheets, hammering against the roof. The occasional rumble of thunder shook the walls, but I tried to ignore it. I was halfway through an episode of some random crime show when I heard it, a noise downstairs. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but then I heard it again. A faint creaking sound like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. My stomach did a little flip. I lived alone. No one should have been down there. I muted the TV and listened, my heart pounding a little harder now. The rain made it hard to hear anything else, but I was sure I wasn't imagining things. I grabbed my phone, crept out of bed, and tiptoed to the top of the stairs. Peering down, everything looked normal. No lights were on except for the faint glow from the kitchen nightlight. Maybe it was just the wind rattling something outside. I tried to shake off the nerves, went downstairs, did a quick check around the house, and found nothing out of place. Just to be sure, I locked the doors, grabbed a bottle of water, and headed back upstairs. I had barely settled back into bed when I heard something else. A sharp thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of something falling. I knew that sound. It was my living room lamp. The one that was kind of wobbly but had never fallen over on its own before. My body tensed. I knew what that meant. Something, or someone, had to have knocked it over. I sat there frozen, my mind racing. Was it the storm? Was I overreacting? My gut told me no. I needed to check again. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to get up. I grabbed the metal flashlight I kept by my nightstand, not just for light, but in case I needed to swing it, and started down the stairs. The lamp was lying on the floor, right in the middle of the living room. The uneasy feeling in my chest deepened. I looked around, scanning the dark corners of the house. Everything else seemed normal, but the storm was still raging outside, making the whole house feel eerie. Something wasn't right. I could feel it. I did another quick sweep of the house. The doors were still locked. The windows were shut, except for one. That's when I noticed the sound. At first I thought it was just the rain, but it was different. It was coming from inside the house, down the hallway. A steady dripping sound. I turned toward the source. my pulse quickening. At the end of the hall, there was a storage closet I rarely used. It had a small window in it. As I got closer, I could hear the rain more clearly, almost like it was inside the walls. My breath caught in my throat as I reached for the doorknob. I pushed the door open, and there it was, the window, wide open. Rain was pouring in, soaking the boxes below. I had never opened that window, not once since moving in. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone had been inside. I backed away, suddenly hyper-aware of how vulnerable I was. My phone was upstairs. My car keys were on the kitchen counter. I had two choices: run up to get my phone or get out now. I chose the second option. Moving as quietly as I could, I crept toward the kitchen, my hands shaking as I reached for my keys. Just as my fingers closed around them, I heard it. Footsteps. Upstairs. Not just slow, creaking steps. Fast, running, coming toward the stairs. Panic surged through me. I didn't wait to think. I bolted for the front door, yanking it open just as the footsteps thundered down the staircase behind me. I ran through the pouring rain, jumped into my car, and locked the doors. My hands fumbled with the keys, adrenaline making it hard to function. I started the engine and peeled out of the driveway, not even looking back. I called 911 as soon as I could. The police arrived within minutes, but when they searched the house, they found nothing. No forced entry, no footprints, nothing stolen. But the open window and the fallen lamp told me everything I needed to know. Whoever had been in my house had been inside long enough to hide. Maybe in my closet, maybe under the bed. Maybe they had been waiting for me to go to sleep. To this day, I don't know what their plan was. Robbery? Something worse? I try not to think about it too much. I moved out a few months later, but even now, 10 years later, I still get that eerie feeling sometimes. That feeling of being watched. And every time I hear a storm rolling in, I remember that night in 2013, when I came terrifyingly close to never making it out of that house. Back in 2024, when I was 22, I worked as a delivery boy in Louisiana. The job wasn't great, but it paid enough, and I didn't mind the long, late-night drives. I'd always liked the quiet of the open road, the hum of the engine, and the way the world seemed to shrink down to just me, the truck, and the distant glow of my headlights. But one night I had an experience that I still can't explain. I was heading back from a late delivery in a small town outside of Baton Rouge. It was just past 2 a.m. and a heavy thunderstorm had rolled in fast, the kind that makes the sky flicker nonstop with lightning, followed by deep, growling thunder that rattles your chest. The rain hit my windshield in waves, so hard that even my wipers at full speed barely made a difference. The road ahead was nothing but darkness and sheets of rain. I turned down my radio, gripping the wheel a little tighter, focusing on staying between the faded white lines. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, maybe a trick of the rain and headlights. But as I got closer, I realized there was a man standing on the side of the road, just outside the reach of my high beams. My foot hovered over the brake. Normally, I wouldn't stop for a hitchhiker, especially in the middle of a storm. But what? If he was in trouble? Stuck out here in the middle of nowhere? Still, something about him didn't sit right. The rain was pouring, yet he wasn't moving. I slowed down as I passed him, getting a better look. He wore a thick, dark coat with the hood pulled up over his face. His hands were stuffed into his pockets. He was soaked, but just stood there, completely still, like he didn't even notice the storm around him. As my headlights washed over him, he didn't flinch, didn't step forward, didn't even turn his head. I kept driving. For a moment, I felt guilty. Maybe he really did need help. But deep in my gut, I knew something was off. If you're stranded in a storm, you wave your arms, run up to the car. Something. This guy, he just stood there, watching. I checked my rearview mirror. He was still there, barely visible through the rain. He hadn't moved. I swallowed hard and shook my head. It was nothing, just some guy waiting for a ride. But then 10 miles later, I saw him again. I slammed on the brakes, my truck skidding slightly on the wet pavement. My pulse pounded in my ears. No way. There were no turns, no side roads, no gas stations. Nowhere to pull off. Yet somehow he was ahead of me. Same dark coat, same hood covering his face. This time, he stood closer to the road, just at the edge of the pavement. A sick, crawling feeling spread through my stomach. This was impossible. For the first time he moved, not toward me, just slightly, angling his body like he was turning to face my truck. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I slammed my foot on the gas, my tires spinning on the slick road before finally gripping. The truck surged forward, and I sped past, him without looking back. The storm worsened. The rain fell in sheets so thick I could barely see past my windshield. Lightning flashed every few seconds, illuminating the highway in eerie bursts of white light. My hands were clammy on the wheel, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Then, he was in the middle of the road. I barely had time to react. I yanked, the wheel hard to the right. My tires screamed against the pavement as I skidded sideways. The truck slid, hydroplaning on the wet road, and then he was gone. Not knocked over. Not running away, just gone. I sat there gripping the wheel, heart pounding, breath shaking. I scanned the road, the ditches, the trees lining the highway. There was nothing. No footprints. No sign that anyone had ever been there. A deep, uneasy feeling settled in my chest. I had to get out of there. I hit the gas and drove. By the time I reached a small gas station on the edge of town, I was barely holding it together. The storm had finally started to die down, but my nerves were shot. I walked inside, my clothes damp with sweat, my hands still shaking. The cashier, behind the counter, a middle-aged man with graying hair, looked up from the tiny TV screen behind him. "You okay, kid?" he asked, giving me a weird look. I hesitated, then blurted it out. I saw someone on the road. Twice. The same person, but it wasn't possible. The cashier's expression changed. Not confusion, not mild concern, something else. "What did he look like?" he asked, his voice lower now. My mouth felt dry. Dark coat, hood up, just standing there, not moving. The man let out a slow breath. He glanced toward the windows as if expecting to see something standing out there in the night. Then he said, "You're the third person this week to say that." I barely remember the drive home. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hooded figure standing in the storm. The next day, I searched online for answers. Missing persons, accidents, urban legends. Nothing. No deaths. No reports. No stories. But sometimes on long night drives, when the rain hits the windshield just right and the road disappears into darkness, I think about him. And I wonder who else has seen him. Or worse, who else will? A few years back, I was home alone for the first time in a while. My parents had gone on a business trip, leaving me with the entire house to myself. At first, it seemed like a perfect opportunity to relax and enjoy some time alone. But instead of spending the night alone, I decided to invite my girlfriend Emily over. We planned to binge-watch movies, eat junk food, and just enjoy each other's company. By the time Emily arrived, the sky had turned dark, and heavy clouds loomed overhead. The weather forecast had mentioned a possible thunderstorm, but I hadn't paid much attention. It wasn't until the rain started hammering against the windows that I realized how intense it was going to be. The wind howled through the trees outside, and distant rumbles of thunder grew louder with each passing minute. We settled on the couch with a horror movie playing in the background, but neither of us was really paying attention. The storm outside was more captivating, with flashes of lightning illuminating the living room every few minutes. The heavy downpour made everything feel cozier until the doorbell rang. It was nearly midnight. Emily and I exchanged a look. "Who could that be at this hour?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated for a moment, then got up and walked toward the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing. The front porch light was on, casting a dim glow over the wet pavement, but there was no one there. A chill ran down my spine. "It's probably just the wind or something," I said, trying to brush it off as I walked back to the couch. Emily nodded, but still looked uneasy. Then the doorbell rang again. This time it was followed by 3 loud, deliberate knocks. Bang. 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 Emily clutched my arm. My heart pounded in my chest. Slowly, I crept back to the door and checked the peephole again. For a second, I thought I saw something, a faint movement like the edge of a shadow slipping out of sight. Someone was there. "Maybe it's a neighbor," Emily whispered, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. I swallowed hard. "I don't think so." The rain continued to pour, thunder cracking in the sky like an explosion. I stood there, frozen, listening, but the knocking didn't return. After a few minutes, I convinced myself that whoever it was had left. Maybe it was just some kids playing a prank. We tried to shake it off and went back to watching our movie, but the tension in the room was thick. Every little noise made us jump. The wind rattling the windows, the occasional flicker of the lights, the branches scraping against the house. Then, just as I was starting to relax, a soft shuffling sound came from inside the house. Emily stiffened. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my breath hitching. It wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from the hallway. I grabbed my phone and slowly stood up. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Something, or someone, was moving inside the house. My mind raced. Had someone gotten in while I was distracted? Then I heard it again. A dragging sound. My stomach twisted. It was coming from my bedroom. I took a deep breath and crept forward, my phone's flashlight trembling in my grip. The hallway was dim, only lit by the occasional flashes of lightning outside. As I reached my bedroom door, I hesitated. The air felt thick, heavy. I pushed the door open. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains. I swept the light around, my heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. The bed, the closet, the corner, nothing seemed out of place. Then my eyes landed on the floor. Something was sticking out from under my bed. A foot. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The foot twitched, and then a man slid out from under my bed. Tall, dressed in dark clothes. His face was turned away, but I could see the way he moved. Slow, deliberate, like he was listening. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my body refused to move. My brain kept telling me, this isn't real. This isn't happening. Then, in the next flash of lightning, he turned his head toward me. His face was pale, hollow-eyed, with an expression that sent pure terror through my veins. That was enough to snap me out of my paralysis. I stumbled, backward, nearly tripping over myself as I grabbed Emily's hand and bolted out of the room. Slamming the door shut, I locked it and dialed 911 with shaking hands. The operator's voice was calm, but I could barely process what they were saying. "Stay on the line. Officers are on their way." The next few minutes were the longest of my life. Emily and I barricaded ourselves in the living room, listening, waiting. The sound of rain pounding on the roof mixed with the deafening silence of the house. Then finally, sirens. The police arrived fast, bursting through the front door with flashlights and weapons drawn. They searched every inch of the house, but they found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no broken windows, no unlocked doors. And worst of all, no trace of the man. The officers reassured us that we were safe, but I knew better. Someone had been in that house. I had seen him. After they left, I sat awake on the couch, watching the storm fade into the early morning light. Emily stayed close, but neither of us could shake the fear that we weren't truly alone. Even now, I can't stop thinking about it. How did he get in? Where did he go? And the worst question of all, what if he was never really gone?